I went through more of the most disturbing and dark Epstein emails so you don't have to. And what I found was potentially even more disturbing than we thought. Here are some of the things that I found. Is it possible that Jeffrey Epstein is actually alive? An FBI agent, according to the emails, was actually the person that was responsible for wiping all of the footage. Another thing, a secretive group described in documents as having just 12 lifetime members with language that excluded women and minorities. So we talk about this fraudulent Austrian passport found in a locked safe and possibly how Jeffrey Epstein actually acquired it. These details and more surfaced when thousands of previously sealed Epstein-related documents and emails were released. I mean, beyond trafficking, which we know is atrocious, these filings suggest a web of influence and access and power that are operating all out of the public view. And today, we are examining the connections, the paper trails, and in my opinion, the most interesting details within these emails that you might have missed. So if you want an even deeper deep dive into some of the recently released documents, well, this is the episode for you. So sit back, relax, and welcome to camp. What's up, people, and welcome back to camp. My name is Mark Gagnon, and thank you for joining me in my tent, where every single week we'll explore the most interesting, fascinating, controversial stories from around the world from all time forever. Yes, that's what happens here in the tent. This is my attempt to understand everything that's really happened and really try to pour myself into the true reality of how our society actually functions. I want to understand what it really means to be human. And so, as a result, we deep dive on all the most interesting stories. And this week, I think we can all agree the most interesting story is Bad Bunny's performance at the Super Bowl, right, Christos?
Absolutely.
But also, we need to talk about these Epstein files. I mean, we dropped an episode last week of just kind of diving into the main sort of themes and stories that popped up, you know, after 48 hours when these files were released. And with more time and more internet sleuthing, a lot of people have kicked up even more interesting details that I want to jump into. Now, a few things before we begin. First off, I don't have the answers. I don't know if anyone does, to be honest with you. I think anyone that's like, this is what's actually going on, I think is probably lying. I don't know if anyone has the totality of truth when it comes to understanding how corrupt and how deep this web goes. So I'm not going to claim that I'm going to have all the answers here. Secondly, this is just, you know, a few hours of me trying to put together what I think makes sort of a comprehensive sort of understanding of how this web really works and how deep it goes and really how many people are connected. Now, let me just say, many individuals mentioned in these documents may not have been charged with wrongdoing. It's possible that they were associated with Epstein and didn't actually commit these nefarious acts of, you know, sex trafficking, etc. I mean, I don't know if that absolves them, you know, in the court of public opinion, but it might absolve them on a criminal basis. And so the inclusion in correspondence or guest lists does not imply criminal involvement. I just want to put that out there because my lawyer said that I should. Now, let's dive into what some of these emails might, you know, give us an insight on, shed some light on sort of how these webs of power and influence sort of work. One of the interesting ones that I found was this revelation that came from a document that talks about an organization called the Zodiac. Now, according to documents, this ultra-exclusive male-only dining club operated under rules that sound like something from like a Sherlock Holmes book or something. And it existed well into the 21st century with members wielding significant influence, both in political circles, but financial circles, etc. Now, the society's most distinctive feature was what insiders call the Rule of 12. At any given time, the Zodiac maintained exactly 12 members, mirroring the 12 signs of the astrological zodiac. But unlike rotating memberships or term limits or anything like that, memberships in the Zodiac were for life, and the only way to gain entry was if a current member died. So before we go any further, I will just read what the correspondence is. So this is an email to Jeffrey Epstein sent on Thursday, August 12th, 2010, and the subject just says Murray. And it says this: just got a note from Bob Peary, who asked me if I thought Murray Gell-Mann would make a good candidate for the Zodiac. As you know, it's one of those last secret type societies where there are only 12 members at any one time, and it's still very secretive. They do really cool stuff, but since, you know, they're mostly all very old men, it's just dinners in exotic locations. I can't tell you all 12 members because I don't know who they are, but I know Paul Volcker is one, some guy named Howdy whose family owns Stuytown, Bob Peary, and I think Tom Brokaw. Bob represents cancer, the sign, not the month. The sign, not the month. I don't even know what that means. You are a member until your death, but if you get senile, they can put you into eccentric orbit and not invite you to meetings. Anyway, the only way to get this is if someone dies. There are obviously no minorities or women allowed. Anyway, let me know what you think. Finally, leaving West Africa tonight. Let me know if you get your postcard. You will hopefully laugh a lot. Miss you. That's the email. Now, think about the implications of that structure for a moment, okay? This wasn't a club where, like, you know, you pay dues and you get a few years and then you eventually age out. This is a permanent seat at a table that never expanded. 11 men could prevent anyone else from ever joining just by staying alive. Like, the exclusivity isn't just social, it's also mathematical. And obviously we know rich people live a long time. But the most damning detail in the document was the explicit membership policy. No minorities or women allowed, which is just, like, this wasn't like implicit bias or some type of statistical thing where it's like, oh yeah, no women, I guess it just, didn't work out that way. It's codified, written down, a stated rule of an organization that apparently wields this significant influence. And all these people basically meeting up, talking about whatever they're going to talk about. I mean, imagine what you would talk about, even if you didn't have some type of nefarious agenda, which it's possible they did. You'd probably meet up and talk about business dealings, people you know, people that are working on stuff. You're connecting people with other people within your orbit. I mean, it's like what this is what I always said. People are always like, oh, the Freemasons, Look, the new secret societies that run shit, you don't know their name. If you know the name, it's done. It's over. If the average guy like me that has a podcast knows the name, it's move on. Like, that's how I feel about it. Like, yeah, the Freemasons were popping way back in. All the founding fathers, they were influential when it came to actually constructing the fabric of American society. But I don't think that they hold the power that they once did. And the people that are actually pulling the strings, you're not going to hear about for another 25 years. It's like American military tech. It's like if there's a Discovery Channel episode about it, it's not the most cutting edge stuff. It's 20 years old. That's how I feel. Now, what's interesting is that this email seems like it put this out into public view a little sooner than it normally would have. Now, what is another interesting deal with this is the eccentric orbit rule, that basically you get too old or senile. You're still alive. You're not expelled. You're just, in orbit. You're not actually going to the meetings. You know what I mean? The membership was until death, no exceptions, but you're not going to be necessarily included at everything. Now, in practice, this means that they're probably just not told when they're going to link up. And, if they're in some type of old folks home somewhere in Nantucket, I can't imagine that they're trying to fly to, Zermatt or, Stad to go have a dinner. Now, imagine being so committed to this exclusivity that you'd rather have an empty seat than admit someone else new, right? Like, that's kind of what this eccentric orbit rule is sort of revealing about how these things work and how these people think. Membership itself is more important than participation. The credential matters more than the contribution. Being able to say that you belong matters than actually going. The full membership list of the Zodiac remains redacted in the release documents, and many names are still blacked out. But the very existence of this organization operating in the modern era, at least up to 2010, which is when we're seeing these emails, with these explicit discriminatory policies, which is just like codified into the emails, like, yeah, no women, no minorities, whatever. It raises other questions, right? Like, okay, we know about the Zodiac, the Rule of 12, whatever, but how many others are there? How many other rooms where these decisions are getting made affecting millions of people every single day that you and I are just excluded from? Like, this is happening all the time and we just don't know about it. And I'm like, up until like 12 months ago, if you were like, oh yeah, I think there's groups of, men getting together that are basically coordinating stuff, you'd be like, oh, you're crazy or whatever. Again, I don't think that there's one singular secret society running the whole show. There's probably competing secret societies of different factions of people all vying for competition. Like, it's probably somewhat of a competitive market, but I think there's multiple, and I think they're all participating in unison, sometimes in lockstep, sometimes against each other, all trying to be the dominant force. What's up, guys? We're going to take a break because I got to give a shout out to Brunt Workwear. All right. These boots surprise the hell out of me. Now, if you've ever worn work boots, you know the deal. You can either get durable or you can get comfortable. All right. Either they're durable and they destroy your feet, or they're comfortable and then they last for like a week and then they fall apart. But with Brunt, you don't have to choose. I put these on right out of the box. Sorry, they're a little dirty because I was shoveling snow with them a little bit earlier. They have no break-in. You can put them on and they fit immediately. They're comfortable immediately, and they're extremely durable immediately. Now, look, I'm not a blue-collar guy, all right? But Brunt was started by that guy, Eric Girard. And because these big workwear brands stopped listening and turned into like fashion companies. So he built an actual boot for people that actually work. And it shows. These things are built incredibly well. They're waterproof. They have a safety toe, soft toe, pull-on, lace-up, whatever job site you're on, whatever place you're working at, they've got what you need. And they stand behind it, because you can wear them to work, and if they're not right, you can send them right back. That alone tells you how confident Brunt is in their product. So if you're sick of uncomfortable boots that don't last, or extremely durable boots that hurt your feet, Brunt is the way to go. I'll be honest, it's freezing cold in New York and it's snowing. These have been incredibly good for me to be shoveling snow outside. So right now, if you're listening to this program, I got great news for you. You're going to get $10 off when you use the code CAMP. You're going to go to Brunt Workwear, that's BURNT, workwear.com/camp. Use that code at checkout, and you're going to be getting $10 off your order. And if you don't like them, hey, no harm, no foul. You send them right back. That is how confident Brunt is that you're going to love these boots. Now let's get back to the show. His connection to geopolitics is potentially even more dangerous because it affects people alive right now at an insane scale. So there are documents from Libya that discuss this sort of relationship between Jeffrey Epstein and an associate named Greg Brown about plans to extort Libyan officials and seize state assets, allegedly. Now, the context here is crucial. This was during a period of instability following the fall of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. Now, Gaddafi's regime had accumulated vast wealth over 4 decades in power. And some estimates suggest that Libya's sovereign wealth fund and foreign assets totaled over $115 billion scattered across, banks and investments and assets worldwide. So when Gaddafi was killed and the government collapsed into civil war, those assets became targets for anyone with the connections or the resources or just the sheer audacity to try to claim them. Now, according to the documents, Epstein and Brown discussed a scheme that operated under the pretext of helping rebuild Libya. The humanitarian cover story was obviously perfect. This is what you need if you're going to try to take assets from a country. And, Libya was in need of help. The country was war-torn at the time in particular, and it needed some assistance, and wealthy benefactors were stepping up, and they were trying to help in a bunch of different capacities, except that wasn't the plan at all. The documents reference discussions involving individuals described as former intelligence operatives to identify vulnerable Libyan officials and ultimately collect compromising information on them, and then use that leverage to gain access to these state-held assets. Does that make sense? They're trying to use former intelligence operatives, basically freelance, you could say private military corporations, and use them to identify these Libyan officials, high-ranking people within the government that were close to Gaddafi, collect compromising material on them, collect blackmail on them, either by finding it or creating it, and then you leverage that to get access to these state secrets. It's crazy. And these weren't low-level intelligence contractors. These were people with specialized skills in surveillance, covert operations, special ops, and, of course, blackmail. So think about that. This wasn't just financial fraud or like an investment scheme or whatever. This was literally a plan to use intelligence tradecraft to blackmail and extort and then seize the assets of a government against literally the people and the officials of that nation, all under the guise of humanitarian assistance. It involved, veterans of, Western intelligence services apparently willing to work with someone who was convicted of procuring a minor, I believe, was his charge, Epstein, in 2008, which is, by the way, that whole thing is a fugazi, but we'll get on that in a second. Are you fact-checking that, Christos? I think that's what, or maybe it was prostitution was technically his charge, but he pled guilty to procuring a minor. Tell me what it is.
In 2008, Jeffrey Epstein pleaded guilty in Florida State Court to soliciting a prostitute and procuring a child for prostitution. As part of the controversial plea deal, he served approximately 13 months.
There you go. So this Libya scheme reveals a bunch of different things about Epstein's network. First, he had connections to intelligence communities and former intelligence communities at remarkably high levels. So who these people were that were willing to do this destabilizing effort in Libya, we don't know necessarily, but we do know that there were people that they could get for a price. Now, this tells us that he has a network of people that are able to do things at an extremely high level with the training of many different foreign governments, I'm sure, that are able to compromise the highest officials in foreign nations and basically do private coups d'etats. Secondly, the scheme shows how exploitation operates at different scale, but it really follows the same playbook. So Epstein, as we know, had a sex trafficking operation that exploited vulnerable young women. Now, these women typically had family needs or financial problems, and they were willing to do anything to get help. Now, the Libya plan sought to exploit an entire vulnerable nation at a different scale, a country torn apart by civil war. And the tactics differed in scope, but the underlying logic is identical, right? Identify weakness, apply leverage, and then extract value. And it really just dehumanizes both the victims of his sex trafficking operation as well as the people of the entire country of Libya that, for right or for wrong, have some entitlement to that sovereign wealth fund that Gaddafi created. Third, it demonstrates how helping can be weaponized. The pretext of rebuilding Libya provided a moral cover for what was actually a predatory operation. And this is extremely common, disturbingly common, rather, in intelligence and financial operations in a lot of these unstable regions. You show up presenting yourself as saviors, and then you leave having extracted everything of value or created a situation or a state that is prone to conflict that's going to require outside help in order to stabilize. Now, the documents don't clearly indicate whether this scheme was actually executed or remained in just a planning stage, or if this was, necessarily what their goal was explicitly. We're kind of reading between the lines a little. But the mere existence of these discussions, documented in writing with specific names and methods, really shows the ambitions and the capabilities of what his network really is. And if carried out as described, these actions could potentially constitute serious international crimes. But for a guy like Epstein, who cares about international crimes, right? He's already a file. But once again, this type of behavior, it reminds me of King Leopold II of Belgium, that basically created a plan on his own accord, that he wasn't even necessarily representing the country of Belgium, but just as himself as a monarch of this nation, saying, we're going to go into the Congo and we're going to civilize these people. We're going to create infrastructure. We're going to help them. We're going to immunize them against viruses and diseases, and we're going to help create a very stable and functioning society here in Africa. Now, what do? They create maybe the most brutal rubber regime ever and create this version of slavery and colonialism that is maybe one of the worst atrocities of the century, truly. And it's all done under the cover of some type of moral mission and colonial projection to try to create a more stable nation and try to civilize these people that need help so bad. It's the same exact playbook that Epstein's using here, where he's like, yeah, maybe we could go in and try to offer some help and da-da-da, and then scoop up all of the assets. Now, that's just one connection. There is another elite connection amongst many, but this one I found particularly interesting, and I saw a lot of people talking about this on X, formerly known as Twitter. One of the more confusing aspects of this massive document release is the repeated references to someone named David Stern. Now, many people initially assumed this was the NBA commissioner, but, the same guy that passed away in 2020, but it wasn't. The real David Stern story might actually be more interesting in terms of how power actually works. Now, David Stern in the Epstein documents is most likely a German investor based in Hong Kong and a former director of Pitch at Palace, a venture capital initiative associated with none other than Prince Andrew. The confusion is understandable, right? The NBA's David Stern is a prominent figure whose name everyone connected. But this David Stern operated in very different circles, and his correspondence with Epstein reveals a lot of important and interesting details about how these elite networks actually function on a day-to-day basis. So, in one email, Stern casually asks Epstein whether, quote, the Rothschild would like to be a sponsor of Pitch at Palace. Now, while the exact individual isn't specified in the available documents, the context suggests that it might be Ariane de Rothschild, a prominent banker who is also named elsewhere within the Epstein files. Now, the casual nature of the request, as if asking a Rothschild for a sponsorship, was as simple as asking someone to grab lunch or if you can connect me with, your business partner, that kind of thing, speaks volumes about the level at which these individuals are operating. That, arguably one of the most notorious banking dynasties of all time, the Rothschild family, the fact that they're just casually being like, yeah, you think they'd be interested? It just shows you kind of the levels of power here. Also, there's something interesting just about like how sort of blunt and quick Epstein is with everything. There's very few emails where he sends where he's like, hi, I hope you're doing well. Everything's just like, when are you coming? When will you be here? How long? Like, it's all like so direct, which to me, it illustrates like some level of like megalomania, that he just doesn't care what anyone thinks about his, demeanor or like his candor. That he's just like, yeah, whatever. Now, the emails with David Stern are interesting to me because they're so mundane. They just show the everyday functionings of these elite networks and how these hyper powerful investors and financiers are talking to each other. Not every email in the Epstein files describes, international criminal conspiracy or, the worst features of his criminal empire, which is obviously sex trafficking. Many simply just show wealthy, connected people asking other wealthy, connected people for introductions and favors, which, in a sense is almost boring in its normalcy. But the mundane networking infrastructure is exactly what enabled these more sinister activities. And also, these types of correspondence would just be completely closed off to the average person like you or I. But now with these releases, you actually see how these people are talking to each other. I mean, you can't run this international exploitation ring without also being able to make a phone call to get someone important on the line. And the same type of capital, whether social or literal, that gets you a meeting with, a Rothschild to support your, campaign, is the same type of thing that keeps prosecutors from looking too closely at your private island, or a little bit more willing to, overlook your crimes down in Miami in 2006, that kind of thing. What's up, people? We're going to take a break really quick because I got to give a shout out to the good folks at Dylan Optics. I mean, for the longest time, I've been wanting a sunglass partner, and I'm so glad that it's a great sunglass brand. All right. If you've ever seen me on stage ever, or just on this podcast with my hair down, I always have sunglasses. I use them to keep my hair back. But now with Dylan Optics, I can also use them on my eyes, because I swear when I put these things on, life was in HD. All right. They've got this patented matte lens technology that kills internal reflections. My least favorite thing is when you're putting on glasses and you can like see glare on the side. And these are amazing. There's no glare, no weird like seeing your own face thing when the sun hits it just right. It is a clean, crisp vision. The founder is the most American dude ever. He was literally in the Air Force, and then after he started experimenting with lenses because he didn't like the sunglasses that he had, and literally was baking the lenses in his mom's oven. I mean, that's America. And now they design and manufacture by hand, and they've got these matte lenses and stabilized resolution lenses that adjust to light and make everything a little sharper. So if you want sunglasses that actually make you see better, that look great, and also rock with us over here at the campsite, you're going to go to DylanOptics.com. That's DILLON optics.com. And if you use the promo code CAMP, C-A-M-P, you're going to save 10% off. So go check it out. Thank you, Dylan Optics, for making this possible. And let's get back to the show. Now, perhaps one of the most politically significant revelations of these new releases concerns Ron Lauder and his connections to both Jeffrey Epstein and Kevin Warsh, a leading candidate for future chairman of the Federal Reserve. Now, Ron Lauder is the heir to the Estee Lauder Cosmetics fortune, and he was also a very good friend with Jeffrey Epstein. Now, this alone isn't particularly surprising, right? Epstein cultivated tons of relationships with many prominent individuals across many different industries, but the depth of that connection, as well as the combined, other documented facts, kind of create a troubling picture. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Lauder served as a U.S. ambassador to Austria from 1986 to 1987. And in 2019, when federal agents raided Jeffrey Epstein's Manhattan mansion, they discovered something strange inside a locked safe. And reports early on were saying that there was potentially passports, perhaps fake passports about Jeffrey Epstein. And as we know now, a fraudulent Austrian passport was found in Epstein's safe, and it happened to cover a period of time overlapping with Lauder's diplomatic tenure, although no direct link has been established. I should make that clear. Now, it's possible this could be pure coincidence. The documents released in 2026 don't establish a direct connection between Lauder's ambassadorship and Epstein's fake passport. This is purely speculation that people on the internet have done. Austria is a real country where a ton of things happen, and there are insiders doing stuff all the time in any nation. But the timing is suspicious enough to warrant some scrutiny, especially given their later close friendship that is pretty clearly acknowledged. Now, it's worth mentioning that Lauder is also a major Trump donor and has been a close friend of Donald Trump for decades. And according to multiple sources, Lauder was the first person to suggest to Trump the idea that Greenland was a valuable piece of real estate. This is a proposal that became public in 2019 and was widely ridiculed, but which Trump has continued to pursue in a very public way. Now, here's where it gets really interesting from a power structure perspective. Ron Lauder's son-in-law, a guy named Kevin Warsh, married Jane Lauder, Ron's daughter. Now, Kevin Warsh has been repeatedly mentioned as a leading candidate to become chairman of the Federal Reserve, the institution that controls U.S. monetary policy and has enormous influence over the global economy. Now, the 2026 documents include what appears to be guest lists from a party at St. Bart's hosted by Jeffrey Epstein. And at number 21 on that list, Jane and Kevin Warsh. Now, this confirms that the Lauder family connection to Epstein extended beyond just Ron, although his daughter and son-in-law also moved in those same social circles. Now, think about the implications of this. A man who has been frequently discussed as a potential future chairman of the Fed and the most, probably the most powerful financial institution or position in the world, chairman of the Fed, attended social events hosted by Jeffrey Epstein, a famous financier from New York, but also, at this point, a convicted sex trafficker. Now, his father-in-law, a major political donor and president of a significant international organization, was known to be very good friends with this same Jeffrey Epstein. Now, again, this doesn't prove any criminal activity at all by Lauder or Warsh, and nothing in the documents suggests that they were involved in Epstein's crimes. But it does demonstrate just how interconnected these networks are, and how someone like Epstein, who could be arrested for and convicted, by the way, of prostitution and the procurement of a minor for prostitution, just how they can be redeemed and brought back into the fold of these elite circles because he had the right connections and the right amount of money. Now, documents indicate that Warsh attended at least one social gathering where Epstein was present, and again, there is no evidence that he was involved in any criminal activity. But these aren't separate worlds. The world of finance and politics and intelligence and crime, they're often overlapping circles on this Venn diagram, and sometimes the people standing in those overlapping sections wield enormous power over the rest of us. Now, let's move on. The Pritzker email is pretty interesting. Among the most bizarre and troubling emails in this whole document release is an email from billionaire Tom Pritzker to Jeffrey Epstein. Now, Pritzker, the executive chairman of the Hyatt Hotels Corporation and a member of one of America's wealthiest families, describes what appears to be an extraordinary trip to Afghanistan. Now, I just find this to be fascinating. In the email, Pritzker basically talks about being escorted to a remote Afghan village, describing the experience with an unsettling phrase, celebrating with boys with toys. The context and the phrasing immediately raises some questions about exactly what occurred and under whose authority such a trip to Afghanistan was arranged. Now, to me, boys with toys sounds like a bunch of dudes with guns and ATVs, but considering you're emailing Jeffrey Epstein, it doesn't sound good. But what makes this correspondence even more significant is the name drop that accompanies it. David Petraeus, the former director of the CIA. According to the email, allegedly, Petraeus was somehow involved in arranging or facilitating this excursion. The former four-star general who commanded U.S. forces both in Iraq and Afghanistan, who later led the CIA before resigning over, allegedly, some type of extramarital affair, that David Petraeus. So think about what this implies. A billionaire hotel magnate is bragging to a convicted sex trafficker that tried to procure a minor for prostitution about a birthday trip to a remote village in an active war zone, escorted with the apparent assistance of one of the most powerful intelligence figures in the world. Like, this wasn't like a tourist visa and like a commercial flight. This was access that required serious connections to the highest levels of military intelligence and infrastructure. Now, this phrase, boys with toys, is, disturbing given who he's talking to. But to me, it refers to, some military hardware, and maybe it implies something more sinister. Who knows? But, when you're talking to Epstein, everything's going to be interpreted in the craziest light. But this Pritzker email also raises questions about what services exactly, intelligence agencies and military figures are providing to wealthy private citizens. Like, if this is true, which a big allegedly, right? If a former CIA director was helping arrange a birthday trip to a remote Afghan village for a billionaire to do cowboy shit or perhaps more sinister activities, what else is being arranged? What other favors are being traded? And what did those billionaires provide in return? Now, we don't have complete answers from the documents, but this correspondence does confirm that Epstein's network extended into, again, this overlap with extreme wealth and intelligence communities and their access. This is a space where rules don't apply, apparently, where, active or formerly active war zones become birthday party venues and, guys can be running around shooting guns and doing, explosions and shit with impunity. It's just, again, it's just interesting to me that you get to a level of wealth where you're able just to do whatever you want. You have access to the highest levels of government. It's just wild. And that these people are able to do this all with impunity. And maybe I shouldn't be so surprised, but it's just concerning to me that you get to a level of wealth where you're no longer anything. And I think that's kind of like the biggest lesson with this, that you get to a level of power and wealth, you're no longer your race, you're no longer your nationality. I don't think you care about America or, men or like whatever the thing is that we at like a lower class level kind of ascribe ourselves to with identity. I think you reach a level of billions where you just transcend all of that and none of it matters. And you just are worried about what makes you more money. Now, at the lower levels, we argue about all these social issues, which most of it means nothing because ultimately this is, a class war disguised as a culture war. But with that said, once you've reached a level of wealth, none of this stuff matters. And they say that it does, and they're putting stuff on their website. It's like, yeah, gay pride, yada, yada. They don't care about any of that. They just care about accruing more capital for themselves. Now, another interesting revelation is Jeffrey Epstein's correspondence with Peter Thiel. Now, it's one of the more, interesting and kind of covered elements of these file releases, which is basically an email exchange between Epstein and Peter, who is the billionaire co-founder of Palantir Technologies. Now, Palantir isn't just another tech company. It is a data aggregating company. Some people would say it is the surveillance backbone for intelligence agencies around the world, as well as private companies. They're able to build digital profiles about all of the citizens that are able to aggregate it using AI and basically pulling data from all of these different sites, like, social media, etc. Now, originally funded by the CIA's venture capital arm, InQtel, Palantir builds the software that lets governments basically track and analyze and predict human behavior at massive scale. So if there's, people have basically drawn the connection between like Big Brother in like, George Orwell's 1984. And people are saying that Palantir is the backbone of the infrastructure, specifically Palantir's Gotham software. Regardless, on October 14th, 2016, Epstein sent Thiel a casual message. Once again, just showing like Epstein's sort of like candor during these emails, I just find fascinating. But just like no capitals, punctuation is kind of off. I'm being offered a chunk of Palantir at 5.5. Thoughts? Thiel responds with an equally casual $5.50 per share. That's somewhat below market. Now, think about that. It's pretty innocuous. It's just kind of like a one-off little email, just these two guys talking about, buying shares in a company. But you have this guy, Jeffrey Epstein, with all of the baggage that goes along with him, basically being offered private shares in one of the most powerful surveillance companies on earth, and his contact for advice on the topic is literally the company's co-founder. Now, the exchange reveals a bunch of different things, that Epstein has access to private placement deals that ordinary investors are never going to see. If you were to go on your Fidelity app or Robinhood or whatever, you're not going to see that $5.50 share price for Palantir. I mean, matter of fact, Palantir wouldn't go public until 2020, but you see my point. These were pre-IPO shares available only to a select network of insiders and connected people. Secondly, the tone of the exchange suggests that this wasn't a one-off interaction, right? This wasn't like, hello, Mr. Thiel, I hope you're doing well. Oh, hello, Mr. Epstein. It's great to hear from you. None of that. Just completely informal, direct, blunt thoughts. Like, that's how I would text like my homie and just be like, yo, what do you think of this? This is wild, right? LOL. That's how you would just, maybe write with someone that you've communicated with before, or maybe that's just how the richest people on the planet interact, just extremely blunt and fast and efficient. Now, consider what Palantir actually does. This is a company whose software has been used to track, migrants and identify targets for drone strikes and surveil populations across the globe. Its client list is, CIA, NSA, FBI, ICE, any type of three-letter agency you want, Palantir is associated with. So if you want to understand how power operates in the age of surveillance and post-privacy, Palantir is the top of the list, and Jeffrey Epstein was apparently on track to become a shareholder. Now, we don't know from the documents whether Epstein completed the purchase. If he was half as smart as he thinks he was, he probably did, but we don't know. What we do know is that he had access and the connections and the capital to invest in the very infrastructure the governments use to basically surveil their citizens, and was able to get personal advice from the guy that created it. So, a man who ran a trafficking operation that evaded detection for decades, and then even after it was detected, was able to skirt accountability, was being invited to own a piece of the entire surveillance operation itself that was supposed to be surveilling him. So, what does that tell you? This Palantir exchange also raises questions about what Thiel knew and when. As of 2016, Epstein had already been convicted in Florida and served time as a registered sex offender. His reputation was well known within elite circles. Yet, here's one of Silicon Valley's most prominent figures just, advising him on stock purposes with no hesitation or concern. Why that is, we don't know. Maybe he wasn't aware of what happened. Maybe he was told a lie or a sanitized version of what Epstein had done, and someone said, he just peed near a school and got put on a list. It's bullshit. Maybe he bought the story. We can only speculate. But, this is how power seems to protect itself. It would follow to reason for me that, these casual text messages and investment tips and networks where people with shady backgrounds are able to get information and access to opportunities that the average person would never get is going to be a way that the elite are able to advance the capital interests of their friends. Now, another interesting little ripple is on February 9th, 2014, someone sent Jeffrey Epstein an email that reads like the opening of like a Dan Brown book or something. It says this, literally, got invited to a top secret dinner that felt so much like something you would host. What? And basically the details that follow are crazy. Guests were instructed to meet at the Hay Adams Hotel directly across from the White House, and then they were transported somewhere far in Virginia. And then their destination was a massive General Dynamics building from the outside that looked like an office complex, but inside it was something else entirely. Now, the email continues and says, it was a library of some of the most bizarre and unbelievable relics. The collection reportedly included the Declaration of Independence, works by the Renaissance anatomist Vesalius. Did you know he was a dwarf? Was the quotes in the email. Nazi weirdness, samples of every element in the periodic table, artifacts from the moon, meteorites, and unspecified, quote, Bible things. But perhaps the most striking was the Amharic collection. This is an ancient Ethiopian, basically, collection of texts on wood and leather about medical magic from like a zillion BC. This is what's in the email. And the guest list was also equally remarkable. The sender said between Vint Cerf, one of the fathers of the internet, head of DARPA programs, the Turing Award winner, and James Randi, the legendary skeptic and magician who was nearly 100 years old at this point. It says, you could open and touch all of the books, even the super, super old ones, the email noted. The casualness of just like the details here is like pretty weird. Priceless historical artifacts just kind of like being passed around by rich people inside this like closed office building thing. And the sender clearly thought that Epstein would appreciate this. Got invited to a top secret dinner that felt so much like something you would host. What kind of parties is Epstein hosting that would make someone feel like this secret vault of like Nazi relics and ancient books and moon rocks would feel familiar? We don't know who owns this collection or what it is. I mean, the Declaration of Independence, what are we talking about? But, that's what is in the email. We don't know who was there. We don't know what conversations happened over dinner between, internet pioneers and former magicians surrounded by artifacts that literally should be put in like the Natural History Museum. And we know someone thought that Jeffrey Epstein would understand this. And that tells us, once again, something about the world where these people operate, where these secret libraries and defense contractor buildings are just party venues, and where World War II memorabilia is just sitting alongside moon samples. And, Epstein's response is just, equally as telling. It just says, up for all. Probably one of the weirdest emails, in my opinion, from this entire thing, where it's just this description of what the elites are ultimately able to do. They're all going to these parties and they're all with the same people. This whole theater of like left versus right and these people hate these people, it's all fake. They're all going to the same Ivy League colleges, and they're all buying houses in the same rare neighborhoods of the Hamptons or Nantucket or whatever. And they're all going to these same parties where they're sitting around ancient artifacts that only they are able to access, just posted up with each other talking. So that's where I'm like, yeah, this is how the elite actually operate. Now, of course, the crimes and things like that are a part of it, but this is just one little sliver that shows the scale and the power and the influence that this small group of people is able to hold over everyone else. What's up, people? We're going to take a break really quick because I got to tell you a little story, all right? This is a story about a man who turned 29 years old and slowly everything started to fall apart. Not in like a dramatic way. Life just got more difficult, all right? You know, the same workouts, all of a sudden, not getting the same gains, you know, in the musculature area. Same diet, all of a sudden just, you know, still being a little bit soft around the middle. And around 2 p.m. every day, just feeling terrible, brain fog, you know, and not to mention, you know, hair falling out, thinning. And that man is my friend David Sanchez. And so naturally, what did he do? He started to panic Google, okay? He was like, low testosterone, what do I do? What do I do? And it was terrifying because doctors act like, oh, the solution's casual. Like, yeah, just inject yourself with testosterone forever. Use needles, dirty old needles from the streets of Kensington, Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, whatever, all right? But then you actually look into like TRT, you know, it's thousands of dollars a year, could have fertility issues. It could shut down your body's natural production. I mean, yeah, you look better, but it might actually leave you worse in the long run. And that's why there's something natural, something I found called Mars Men. Yes. And I've been taking it consistently, and some men have actually reported, better energy all day, better focus, stronger lifts, not just a spike, but a steady, consistent drive. And yeah, it's not TRT. There's no needles, no synthetics, no dependency. It's designed to support healthy testosterone using real ingredients like zinc, boron, tangat, ali, things that your body actually recognizes and needs to fuel testosterone use. Yeah, I genuinely like it. I just wake up in the morning, toss a couple pills back, and I start feeling better, and so can you. With Mars Men, I feel great, and you should start feeling great too. And the way you do that is you go to mengotomars.com, and for a limited time, the listeners of this program are going to get 50% off for life, plus free shipping, and 3 free gifts at mengotomars.com. That's right, use the promo code CAMP, and you're going to be getting all that and more, and better yet, 90-day money-back guarantee. If you don't like it, just be like, hey, this isn't for me. Send it back. If you feel no difference, which odds are you won't, because 91% of men say that they feel more energetic when they're taking it, but maybe you're in the 9%. You send it back, money back. I'm telling you, there's no reason not to try it. And after you purchase, they will ask you how you heard about them. Please say you heard about it from the good old folks here at camp. It really helps the show, and it keeps the fire burning. Let's get back to it. Another interesting document that has been released from this latest bunch, it seems to imply that the FBI, or at least one agent within the FBI, was complicit in the destruction of the video footage that was found outside of Jeffrey Epstein's cell the night that he himself. Now, according to this file, which is found in a PDF ending in 4309 that I'll link at the bottom, it basically says this. Blank, the person that's being interviewed, advised that only one hard drive of the camera system was working at the time of the incident on August 10, 2019. When a DVR, digital video recorder, went bad, none of the cameras recorded. There was a system failure of DVR2 on July 29, 2019, and the motherboard failed on DVR2 on August 8, 2019. The hard drive failure occurred on August 10, 2019. Now, Blank recalled that there was a body alarm around 6 a.m., and he was one of the MCC personnel who responded. Blank stated that he was one of the personnel who briefly tried to resuscitate Jeffrey Epstein. Now, quote, according to this document, after the incident, Blank was asked about the cameras. There were 2 new hard drives to install, but installing the new hard drive would mean that all prior data would be lost. The warden wanted video, and so Blank was told to start working on the system. Blank started removing the bad drives in order to rebuild the DVR. Blank advised that an FBI agent was the one who pulled out the DVR. Blank also advised that he knew that by replacing both hard drives, the system would be wiped out, and that he had advised personnel at MCC of that. Now, this just says to me like one, either gross incompetence or some type of deliberate cover-up to destroy any video footage that was out there. A few things on this. One, according to this guy's testimony, the FBI agent either directed or on his own volition, destroyed the only video recording of Jeffrey Epstein's cell the night that he died. Why this was done, it could have been a guy's mistake. And he said, yeah, let's just try to redo the system. It could be an intentional cover-up, that he was like involved in some way, that he was told from his higher-ups, hey, make sure this footage doesn't get out. And he sees this easy switch to say, oh, if I'm able to replace these drives, everything gets wiped. Boom, do it. Secondly, there was this whole charade, this whole theater where the administration that's currently in power put out a bunch of video footage and said, here's everything. Here's everything you need to see. Nothing happens. Here's all the hours of Epstein's cell. And it seems like, according to this, that all that footage that was released was just fake. Was it AI? Was it a loop of footage that was just put on for hours to make it seem like it was the entire video recording? We don't know. But we do know from this email is that the FBI, or at least an agent within the FBI, allegedly, according to this email, was the one that destroyed the video footage. Why he did this, no one knows. Will there ever be an investigation as to who destroyed this video footage and deprived the American people and, of course, the victims of Jeffrey Epstein and his criminal network about what actually happened to him and who's responsible for his death? Was it him? Was it someone else? No. That investigation will probably never happen, and this FBI agent that destroyed this footage will probably be promoted at some point in the future. Another interesting ripple from this recent batch of file releases is how really the internal structure of Epstein's trafficking organization worked. And now credit to uncovering this goes to CoffeeZilla, that released an entire expose on its channel, Voidzilla, that's worth checking out. But the documents detail the activities of what you can only describe really as a scouting agency for young girls that allegedly involved an individual named Daniel Siad. Now, these specific documents paint a really crazy picture. One described the scout and their role, another showed payment records for successful recruitment, and the third contained an actual scouting agreement with terms and conditions, basically. Now, this wasn't informal or casual or opportunistic. Documents suggest formal agreements that may have existed for this systemic, professional, and meticulous procurement operation. The scouting agreements laid out specific terms for identifying, approaching, and recruiting and delivering young women into Epstein's network. Payment was tracked and recorded like any other business expense, and the prosecutors described a structured recruitment system that operated with financial incentives. So, the scout model is particularly insidious because it exploited these existing trust relationships. So often, scouts would be young women themselves, people who had already been brought into Epstein's orbit and were now tasked with recruiting others that were like them. So they would approach classmates at school, friends from their neighborhood, acquaintances at the mall, basically with promises of modeling opportunities and educational support and potentially even career advancement. And that's how trafficking actually works in the real world. It's not strangers grabbing people off the street and throwing them in vans. Sure, that happens, but the vast majority of trafficking is someone that you know, someone who seems to have found opportunities that you don't have access to, offering you a chance that seems just too good to pass up. And I know you didn't want to get into this kind of thing, but this could be really good for you in the future. And by the time you realize what you've walked into, you're already compromised, you're already vulnerable, and you're just in too deep to just walk away. Now, the payment documents show that this wasn't volunteer work or a favor amongst friends or, creepy guys doing creepy guy stuff. Scouts were compensated for successful recruitment. So cold, hard cash, basically, for every new girl brought into the network. Now, this created a powerful financial incentive that encouraged bringing more young women in while ignoring the ethical concerns or the warning signs. I mean, it's really like an MLM of exploitation. Now, the formalization of this process, the fact that there were written agreements with terms and conditions, speaks to the scale and the sophistication of what Epstein had created. This wasn't opportunistic predation or a crime of convenience. It was planned and structured and systemically organized to be as scalable and as effective and efficient as possible. Scouts would continuously just feed the system, ensuring a steady supply of new victims that then would become new scouts, and the entire system would repeat. Now, what makes the scout pipeline particularly effective from an operational perspective is this plausible deniability. If a scout approaches someone and that person refuses or reports it, the scout can claim that it was just a misunderstanding about a legitimate modeling opportunity. They're like, yeah, this was a beautiful girl. I thought she would do great within this modeling agency, and she turned it down. I didn't do anything wrong. So if a scout is caught or prosecuted, they're a lower level operative that can just get cut out. They're not the principal. It actually doesn't ever affect the head of the snake. They're just a replaceable cog basically within a machine. Now, the structure protects the people at the very top by creating layers of intermediaries and fall guys all the way up. Now, the Daniel Siad documents confirm what survivors have basically been yelling for years, that this was an organized operation with multiple moving parts and professional structure and almost like a business-like process, not just one predator acting alone, but this entire criminal enterprise with employees. Now, what makes this email revelation particularly interesting is that the FBI concluded that Jeffrey Epstein wasn't running a sex trafficking ring for powerful men, according to files. This is from groundnews.com. That's what they said. They said that prosecutors reported that seized photos and videos from Epstein's home in New York and Florida did not show victims being abused or link other people to the crimes. Financial reviews found payments to women and organizers tied to prominent figures, but no evidence of trafficking, the record said. Great news. I mean, that's great, right? It turns out this whole trafficking operation was for no one. This was just for Epstein, and he's dead. So with him dies the sins of hundreds of other men that were complicit in these crimes. Now, another funny ripple this week, Ghislaine Maxwell was like, yeah, I will testify. And then at the very end said, actually, I'm going to take my Fifth Amendment right. And yeah, she says, I'm not going to talk. Now, according to Ground News, Ghislaine Maxwell says she will cooperate with lawmakers if granted clemency, invoking Fifth Amendment declines to answer lawmakers' questions. Now, the theory that people are kind of swirling around is that Ghislaine is basically making a deal with old Trump to say, hey, if you give me a shortened sentence or just, pardon me completely, I will keep my mouth shut and not implicate you in any crimes. Which is just crazy. That basically Ghislaine is just like, hey, if you can pardon me of these crimes, I will speak about you and say that there were no crimes. It's like, which is it? Like, you're in jail for crimes. And then you're going to be like, actually, there were no crimes. Like, how does that make any sense? But of course, this is just how power moves. I mean, governments are basically mafias, just with better branding. Now, this 2026 Epstein email release doesn't tell us something entirely new, right? We already know that Jeffrey Epstein is a, rampant file sex trafficking operator that, was really well connected to powerful people. But what these documents do show is it fills some crucial details and kind of lets us in on how these systems operate and how powerful people talk to each other and how they behave when they're protected from this scrutiny. I mean, there's secret societies, there's membership rules that sound, medieval, plans allegedly to destabilize and exploit foreign nations in order to, steal all their assets under the pretext of humanitarian assistance. I mean, there's so much stuff in these files that it's almost overwhelming and it makes your head spin and it just, almost makes you go like, what can I do? And what's crazy is that at the connecting point of all of these, all of these people is this one evil guy. Now, I've heard the theory floated out there by a few people that, after the church committee and so much information was sort of declassified about the U.S. government, and that basically back in the day, the U.S. government was able to operate in a way more secretive way, that things would kind of be done under governmental regulation and supervision, but the public would never know about it. And then there was higher levels of transparency that the U.S. people and the citizens of America wanted to see stuff. So as a result, the nefarious activities didn't end. They just went off market. And they went to these private citizens, kind of like these third-party proxies, these escrows, you could say, for, nefarious dealings, people passing money back and forth, people able to inject capital into government programs or private, funds or military operations that were disconnected from the government. That way, someone like Epstein, who is already compromised because he is a notorious, sexual predator, that this guy can get cut off and all the people that function within the government and within the elite circles wouldn't be affected, and that they're able to use this as a fall guy. And, he's ostensibly a smart guy, but he just has such a high tolerance for risk that he's willing to balance on the tightest tightrope of all, knowing that any wrong move, pissing off the wrong person, or getting too exposed would ultimately lead into his death. Now, the saddest part is that with his death, no one else will be accountable. Almost certainly. I mean, look at Ghislaine Maxwell. She knows where the bodies are buried, and she's able to sit in a cushy prison and, take her Fifth Amendment right and not testify about anything. I mean, Epstein could have pursued genetic experiments and destabilized governments and done so many things beyond what we know he was convicted for and all the terrible, treacherous things that he did commit. But no one will ever be implicated because, Jeffrey Epstein's already dead. And this is how the system was designed on purpose, that he was the arm that could get cut off while the head of the dragon stays intact. And the head, who is it? Ultimately, the richest, most powerful people in America now and around the world. I mean, I don't think it's that mysterious to try to speculate who these people are. It's the people that are meeting at, private events, private dinners, secret societies, all sharing information, sharing insider secrets, and ultimately creating these systems that allow exploitation and the most nefarious aspects of society to operate without anyone ever knowing. And that is part 2 of my sort of dissertation on Jeffrey Epstein, trying to go through all these files and find the most interesting tidbits for you guys here at the campsite. What do you guys think? I mean, we got some great feedback from the first episode. I thought the conversation happening in the comments was fascinating. I would love to continue that with this one. So please, if you have any thoughts, if you have read anything that you think is significant, please drop an email. Please drop a comment on YouTube. Let me know what you think. I'm sure this is not the last time that we'll, be covering this specific story, because I don't think this story is going anywhere. Thank goodness that this is going to keep on sort of promulgating on social media, despite how much people within the mainstream as well as within the government are trying to suppress it. So please drop a comment. I'm sure we're going to be getting, other experts on this topic that are able to come in and, give their take. This is just me as a singular guy with a couple buddies trying to research and really understand what's going on here. So if there's anything I missed, anything I messed up, please drop a comment and I will see you guys next time. Actually, before I sign off, I want to give a shout out. If you are interested in history deep dives, we got History Camp. You can check it out in the description. We do all sorts of interesting stories and biographies on the most interesting people throughout all history. We also do Religion Camp. That is where I explore what everyone believes on this planet, a deep dive on the most integral, fundamental aspects of every religion that all humans seem to, have some connection with. Now, if you just like deep dives and interviews, great news. We do these twice a week here at the campsite. So thank you so much. Appreciate y'all. And I'll see you next time. Peace. What's up, people? We're going to take a break real quick because this episode is sponsored by me. Yes, Camp R&D. That is the merch. That is the threads that we be wearing around here at the campsite. And we got all sorts of cool stuff. My buddy Zach just cooked up a sick UFO collection. You can go check it out there at Camp R&D. I really appreciate you guys. We had so many people that came through for the holidays and picked up their threads. It's awesome. We got hats, hoodies, t-shirts, all that. And if you're still listening to this and you didn't skip through, congrats. You got a promo code, all right? What do we do, Christos? 5%?
More.
How much?
5 more.
10%. 10% final offer?
You won't go higher.
You tell me. What do we give them?
12%.
All right, we're doing 12% off. Should we go more?
Hey, it's your world. I'm just living in it.
Let's round up. 10%. No, 15%. If you use the promo code CAMP15, you're going to be getting 15% off. Yes. I think we should also do Camp 10. Just if someone doesn't want to take too much. Camp 10 or Camp 15. Those are the only two that are available.
And then maybe we send a little something extra to the ones that do 10.
If you do Camp 10, maybe there's something extra. No promises, but it's an interesting experiment. I just am curious to see what you guys do. Camp 10 or Camp 15 at Camp R&D. When you check out, you're going to be getting those discounts. Thank you so much for rocking with us and wearing the threads. It keeps the lights on. It keeps the fire burning.